so nobody's here to see me, but my name is Justice Mitchell. I run JusticeMitchell.com as well as a bunch of other brands and blogs and podcasts and stuff like that. However, one of the ones that I do is I'm the executive producer of QueensCast.com. Queenscast is a podcast as well as an ongoing blog for women's soccer, collegiate women's soccer, and co-ed youth soccer. And what we did is we cut the first season basically on our own, and much like all of us who get started in podcasting or in any type of new technology, so to speak, we do so at our own peril and with the things that we think are right. So we kick the tires for a year, and in so doing, if anybody has engaged in sports marketing, it is one of those things that is absolutely critical that you are consistent about when you drop your content, because as you start to get your engagement and your audience following, they're going to depend on that content dropping at a specific time. This becomes problematic when it becomes a production-oriented piece, much like a podcast, in trying to make sure that your producer gets this material, produces it properly, and we drop it at the same time. So what had happened is, after about a season of this and us having to sort of dodge and do various things to make sure that the show got on time, I reached out to some forums and met these gentlemen, Jay and Tony of GLPro. So I'll quickly just say that we ended up creating this wonderful situation where I actually had the show cut all the way down to Thursday at any given time, sometimes midnight, 1 in the morning. We put it in a Dropbox, it goes to the UK, it gets cut while we sleep, and we post Friday morning.
Time travel.
It is a beautiful scenario. So with that, I would like to introduce Tony and Jay.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Justin, for the kind words. Who are we, Jay?
Great question. So I'm Jay, and this is Tony, and we're the two founders of GLProUK, and we're a podcast production company based out of the UK. So we work with brands and businesses who want to utilize the power of podcasting to get in front of an audience that maybe they haven't. And when we spoke with Justice and Bess about coming here and speaking at FLBlogCon, I thought it was a great place because so many bloggers aren't necessarily using podcasting to distribute their content to a whole other audience who they could be. So I guess the best analogy or the best description or way of talking about that is commuting. I know an awful lot of people who read blogs, whether on a train or going to work that way. Personally, I drive. And as I said in a meeting yesterday, I find it very, very difficult to read a blog and drive at the same time.
Some say unadvised.
Nah, sure. Depends on how good the content is. So podcasting can be one of the cheapest and easiest ways for you to reach an entirely different market and bloggers have already done the hard work. You've already done the hard work and created great content. This is really about just how to distribute it to an entirely different audience. So speaking of audiences, and I promise I won't make you do too many things, but how many people here listen to podcasts? Let's see a show of hands. You're my favourite.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So about half the room. And does anybody have a podcast? Okay, a lot less people. Great. Okay, cool. So I just want to see where we are so we weren't condescending or not giving enough information.
And how many of us are bloggers or writers? Again, about half. And is the rest of us representing brands or just here for fun? Sorry, is that me? Am I a bit quiet? Or am I muted? Can you hear me any better?
There you go.
Yeah, we're audio specialists.
You think? Yeah. I mean, I could just speak without the mic. No, we'll go with the mic.
Yes, so we've got a mixture of people who have used podcasting, haven't used podcasting, but I guess everyone's heard of it because in the UK I have to explain what a podcast is to people and say things like internet
And when he
radio.
says podcast, he means podcast.
Of course I do.
Yeah, just because it's not always clear.
Okay, so let's go to the first one.
Bro, well, first thing I want to talk about is, and I'm not going to throw loads of stats at you all day with the slideshow, but just a few to kind of get the ball rolling. Outside of the people that read blogs, with podcasts, and people that listen to podcasts, that group, that demographic is growing every year, and they are becoming the decision makers in a lot of communities. A few stats here to just talk about that. 44%, and these stats come from a poll in the US. It was an Edison research paper about 2018 podcast consumers, essentially. I think it was around 2,000 people entered it, but these are the stats that come out of it. So 44% of people have listened to a podcast, 26% have this month or do monthly. And in the US, that's 73 million people.
So that's 73 million people. But lots of you haven't got a podcast. Okay.
And there's an overlap there. There's going to be an overlap with people that read blogs, but there's also going to be a huge section of that people, like Jay says, that are commuting, don't necessarily have the time to read, but do have the time to listen while they work, while they're driving, whatever it might be. In the US, 57% of the population are in that age bracket where they're becoming influencers and they're becoming decision makers. And that's 70% of podcast listeners fit that bracket. They are, as time goes on, they're going from the kids and they're growing up, and these guys are becoming the people that are going to be making decisions. So more and more so, we want to get into their heads. And as this says, 6.5 hours a week is the average listener, like time listened from that we got from these listeners.
Now, from working with brands, one of the hardest things for podcasters to do is create content. Which again is why this is a perfect place for us to come and talk to you guys. I don't have to explain to you about how to create content. You get that. That's why you're here. This is about how you distribute it and how you put it out. So podcast isn't just released onto the podcast app. It's also released onto places like YouTube. You could repurpose content that you're already doing on Facebook Live and then post that out as a podcast after the fact. So essentially, you're just looking at taking one piece of content and doubling down, trebling down, and making sure it's actually landing in front of all of the possible people that you can.
And equally, for the copywriters and bloggers amongst you, every podcast has show notes that sit alongside it. Some people write them themselves. Some people go all out and then pay exorbitant amounts to have them written properly about the show. And the reason for that is that all of those show notes are put out there by iTunes, by Google, by Spotify. They're doing some of the SEO work for you. So you absolutely should take advantage of that. And this is bloggers, there's a lot of work out there in just writing for podcasts, essentially listening to the show and writing. It couldn't be easier. But it gets you out there. It is not just the audio, but the audio helps present your written work alongside it and helps to get it out there.
And we'll get around to what show notes are in a little bit when we're
Maybe
a little bit deep to this. Also, we're going to do very broad strokes here today.
Yes.
What we have been doing for the last month,
8 weeks.
8 weeks, we've got a podcast where we're literally breaking down all of the ways of starting a podcast. We're eating our own dog food here and posting it out. So feel free to subscribe at GLCast, and it will give real detailed information. And again, in those show notes, which is the bit you see on your phone, there'll be links and such with more information. So also come and find us. We're dead nice, honest.
And within that, there's some deep dives into things that we'll brush over today. Not just the GLCast, but the live stream we did for FLBlogCon a few weeks back. We went into quite a lot of it there, so that's out there as well, which I think will also be out on the podcast feed soon. So shall we move along, sir?
Yeah.
What do we have next? Simple. How do we get started? That might sound like a silly question to jump into so quickly, but the truth is, if you're to get started, you need to practice. We need to start recording. There's no need to start wasting money on buying expensive equipment or doing anything right now if you're not going to be able to, if you're not going to get into it and you're not going to keep doing it, it'll just be a waste. As Jay likes to talk about pod fading, is that what you call it?
Yeah, so pod fading is a term that's come out in the last year or so because so many podcasts start and 10 episodes in, they kind of disappear and they're no longer around. So one of the things we say to people is don't spend 6 months thinking about what your show is going to be, what you're going to say, because a podcast is an organic thing and it grows with time and you have to let it, much like a blog. The more you do it and you get feedback from your audience, you're going to say, okay, we can do this, we can do a new show, I want to have different guests on, I want to do a monologue. So it's also a skill. Start podcasting, you'll get better at it, you'll get better at interviewing, you'll get better at talking for an awful long time on your own and staying on point and not rambling too much. So just get started. You don't have to make a huge investment. We're true podcast fans, and I've seen some great podcasts recorded on nothing but a phone or...
Right now I'm recording this on my phone. You must record everything, and we're live streaming to Facebook straight here as well. That will essentially give me multiple feeds for later on if I want to tighten that up and make it sound even better.
And we thought we'd do it on the most simple tech, just to show you guys, and we can post it out later, that it's literally that easy. It's hit Facebook Live and you have everything you need.
Obviously, audio quality goes a long way beyond that, but in terms of just getting it out there, the phones these days are very good. The microphones they put in them are so much better than they were, than what we were using in the studio 10 years ago. Well, that's an exaggeration, but you know. Equally, if you're bloggers or you are a brand that has a blog that is constantly putting out content, you already have content. The simplest thing to do is just to have someone read that blog so that someone that comes to the blog doesn't have time to read it, can just click and listen to it while they're on the move. It is the simplest, most efficient way of creating audio content and creating a podcast without even really having to think about it, because you've already got your content.
You could easily sit down, read out 12 blogs that you've already written in a day, in 2-3 hours, and you could have a podcast released every month then for an entire year. It's as simple as that to create content with podcasting. With businesses, if you're working with them and you're trying to get them to utilize this idea, it's much easier to say, let's get the guy, let's get the CEO, let's get the president in the room for 2 hours and we're going to have 3 different conversations. Well, out of that, then you're going to have 3 or 4, say 3 podcasts that you can release. That's 3 months worth of content. It's a very, very easy, simple way. Now, everyone's posting content all the time. Does anyone here Facebook Live or Insta Story or anything like that? Because if you do, that's absolutely content that can be repurposed and pushed out to podcasting. But what's going to happen is you're going to jump on the back of some of the biggest marketing influencers on the planet. iTunes, Google Play, they're pretty big, right?
Yeah,
Spotify. These are all just the biggest brands possible, and you're actually piggybacking on their marketing with content you've already created. So by really utilizing content you've already done, you're saving time, you're getting out to a larger audience, and essentially you're making sure that that one great piece of content, which you took all that time to create, is sitting in front of everyone possible.
Obviously, some content's time sensitive, but
Yeah.
largely, I guarantee you have something that you've already written that you can put out again and it's still relevant today. So we talked about start recording. I want to go over the basics of what you need to do that. What have you already got? You don't need to buy any equipment, but if you wanted to, we'll start at a low level. If you go to some of the podcasts we were talking about on GLCast, there are deep dive episodes on equipment bans, plug-in bans, different software that you can buy. So I guarantee, if you're interested in any of this, go there and there'll be a lot more detail. But
Okay, so before Tony goes on, he's dead smart. He's real clever. So I'm going to try and translate when he gets too clever. If someone could, Woober, if you could wave at me every time he gets too crazy, that would be helpful. This part is the bit that stops people podcasting, because it's scary, right? I got to buy equipment, and I got to find the right environment. It's so much easier than you think it would be. So break it down real simple for us.
Barney style.
Barney style, okay.
Equipment-wise, like we said already, you could start with just your phone. Everyone's got a phone that's got a good enough mic. As long as you're in the right room, we'll get to environment. But to be honest, the microphone on the phone is brilliant for recording, as long as you don't have too much echo, too much background noise. I know that you guys like your AC in this country, but it does make a lot of noise, and if you put it next to the microphone, it can become quite a problem.
I get it's hot, but don't sit next to the AC.
Yeah. It's more of a problem than you think. People don't think about it. That comes back to what it says down there, always wear headphones. If you're wearing headphones, you will hear that and you'll be like, wait a minute, I should turn the AC off, or I should go over to the other side of the room. Anyway, equipment. Beyond just using a phone, you can get set up really easily equipment-wise. There's probably, we have 3 bands of equipment, or 3 bands of type of client or type of podcaster that you might be. But to get started, you could spend as little as $100, $200 to buy a small recorder, some microphones.
What do you need, Tony?
So the basics of what you need is, there's 2 ways to come at this. You can either have a recorder that has everything built into it, so you don't require the computer to sit alongside it. I'd recommend this, especially if you don't have a recording background, because you're just having to learn how to use software that's not necessary right now.
Who makes recorders, Tony?
Who makes recorders? Zoom, Tascam, who's the...
So these are the things that you used to see in the movies when they'd have a tape deck strapped in. There's a bunch of digital versions now. They're great, they're not a huge investment, and they're very, very useful for the future.
Yeah. Zoom, for instance, and Tascam do a very good job of this as well. They'll make various devices that have a microphone built in, but you could also jack extra microphones in. You might be doing a podcast by yourself. You might suddenly have 5 guests, and you don't want to necessarily have to buy new equipment every time you change that dynamic. So Zoom and Tascam provide certain devices that give you the options to do to expand without spending too much, I guess is the best way to put it.
Sorry.
Go ahead, sir.
One,
No, please.
is it USB based where it plugs into a computer?
Absolutely. So these types of devices have an SD card built in, or not built in, but you can put an SD card in to record, or you can use it as an interface into the computer, whichever you choose to do. If you plug it in via USB, it will give you the option of selecting it as an interface, at which point it will show up in Logic or Audition or Audacity. These are DAWs. We'll get to that. We're in the equipment phase. So
If you are looking to start very cheaply, that is one of the simplest ways.
Yeah.
Everyone has a laptop, I hope. Otherwise, we're going to find it hard unless you're writing your blogs on paper and sending them in. So if you can literally buy a USB microphone that plugs into your laptop and you're podcasting, your headphones can go into your laptop as well. These recorders, these other things we're speaking about getting better microphones, that's when you're going to start moving up the quality. But as we said earlier, the most important thing with podcasting is to get started. So don't go out and spend $3,000 trying to get the best equipment and so you can rival Joe Rogan before you started creating content. Start creating content and then you'll say, that doesn't sound good enough. I want to buy a new mic. That's your Christmas present. Hey honey, buy me a mic this year because my podcast is getting better. Bye.
But to answer your question again though, there's you could buy something like a Blue Yeti microphone, which is just a USB microphone plugs in, and they're great for what they do. What Zoom and Tascam provide, though, is the ability to then unplug that, walk around and record. So if you can record on the move rather than just in one spot. It really depends what you're going to do. If you're always going to be in one spot, then that's all you need, then brilliant.
What kind of environment do I need to be in, Tony?
Well, everybody has slightly different environments, right? Really, you don't want a big room like this. Reverb is one of the biggest problems in podcasting, in recording generally. Reverb is essentially bouncing waves. Anyone that's not...
This is a really way of working it out. If you go into a room and go, and it does that, no good.
No.
Okay.
Literally, that's what he does at the start of every podcast.
He doesn't like it.
We can mitigate against that in post. There are certain plugins and software that you can use to get rid of reverb, but if you can mitigate against it at the beginning, you don't have to worry about that, if you're doing the show by yourself.
And think about any radio show you've ever seen. Howard Stern isn't sat with a microphone across the room. He's got the thing right in front of him. Just like this, it's just not going to work, right? You need to have the microphone right in front of you and then keep it there the whole time and think about that. So if that's the case, you don't need a massive room. Smaller room, the better. And also, people, sure.
There was a gal that I knew that started her podcast in her closet.
Perfect.
Absolutely. You
And
can build a closet into what you need it to be. You've got this as well.
Think about when you see anyone recording vocals in any music video ever. They're not in a great big room. They're in that little booth. They're in a closet, right? Simple as that. Now, one thing to think about is soft furnishings. You know how they have the eggshell stuff? Well, don't go out and buy a load of soundproofing. Again, we're talking about not spending the earth to get this done.
Just clutter.
Just things.
Not flat walls, essentially. Anything you can do to stop the waves from hitting flat walls or hitting flat surfaces. So just cluttering up the room will actually help your sound be better.
Pictures, curtains. It literally is as simple as that.
So becoming a hoarder, what do you do? Like a hoarder?
Yeah,
absolutely. Hoarders are the best
hoarder
podcast.
early in life, and that's going to help you podcasting now. Exactly.
Also, if you are a hoarder, you have piles of stuff that you can spend time talking about. So, good show.
Okay, and then content. So when you're recording, think about your content you want. If Tony and I are sitting down and I'm interviewing him for my show, then maybe I want to write down some bullet points. Think about what I'm trying to achieve. If I've only got this guest, this fantastic, intelligent, gorgeous guest of mine for an hour, then I absolutely need to make sure that I get a few questions out that I really want to get. Otherwise, we're going to spend 45 minutes talking about his journey getting here, 15 minutes about what I want to talk about, and I'm going to lose the good content. So think about what you're trying to achieve beforehand. Also, have a little list of things. Tell people stuff. For instance, don't have the mic away from you, and tell people while we're podcasting, if you tend to drift away from that microphone, I'm going to say that, but don't worry, carry on, it's going to be okay.
And as you record a podcast, you're going to learn things about your environment and your equipment that apply to you. tell your guests about that. If you've got a guest that's coming on, you need to tell them they need to have the same information you have, or they're going to make the same mistakes that you'd make if you didn't know. The other thing about content, make sure you think about where that content's going before you start recording, utilising it correctly. Queenscast is a great example. They live stream the show. Before it's sent over to us to be edited overnight, they live stream the show on Facebook live. So certain people they see the behind the scenes stuff, the bits that we cut out. If you want to see that, you can go and watch the live stream, but you don't get the full cut down edited versions. Some people prefer that, but because they do that, it caters for multiple types of consumer.
It's also giving your community and your audience a little something extra if they want to be part of the behind the scenes and they get to be part of that. Also, marketing-wise, I've just given myself 2 things to market at one event. I can say, check out this live event, it's happening this time. I can be talking about that a week beforehand. 8 p.m. on Friday, we're going to go live. A week later, when that podcast is edited and ready to go, I can then be posting it again, or a month later, whenever. But you can use it more effectively in a marketing strategy when you're doubling down on the content.
That Facebook Live video could then also be cut up and put onto YouTube. We don't want to reuse the same thing forever, but some people use YouTube, some people use Facebook, some people don't use certain platforms. So you need to try and hit everybody if that's...
I genuinely know a bunch of people who would tell me about podcasters I know as YouTube stars.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what, Joe Rogan's a YouTube star? I'm pretty sure he's the biggest podcaster in the world. That's how they've only ever watched the YouTube show. Never thought of that beforehand. And what should we do with headphones, Tom?
Always wear headphones.
Okay.
At least to begin with. Ideally, your guest, if you have guests, ideally everyone's wearing headphones so that they're aware of what's being recorded. You can, over time, if you're sitting down for an hour, a guest will slowly edge away from the microphone. If they can't hear themselves, it's just inevitable that will happen. Whereas if you can get everybody in headphones, it can interrupt some people's flow, and it can make certain people uncomfortable, but they will at least be able to hear what they sound like, and
which is really important. It really helps.
What I missed in equipment is software. I mentioned it very briefly.
Ooh.
To record with, if you're not going to record straight onto a device by just pressing go, you might want to record with some software. Audacity is a DAW. It's a free DAW. A DAW is a digital audio workspace. It's basically Logic, Adobe Audition, Pro Tools, but Audacity is a free one. If you're just getting involved and just getting started, you don't want to spend any money, Audacity is great. It does a great job, and there's no need to spend money there.
So, as an explanation for people who are not as smart as him, I was going to say as dumb as me, but I don't mean. So, when you see the wavy things, when people are doing stuff behind the scenes in movies, they're doing that on a DAW, a digital audio
workspace.
I don't know. So that is where you'll see, that's where you can cut things, edit things, change the sound. They're very easy to use. And what's the easiest one? There's the free ones, which is like Audacity.
Audacity, yeah. Although, and I imagine quite a few people in this room might have Adobe Creative Cloud already. Adobe Audition comes with Creative Cloud, and it's brilliant. Adobe Audition is the audio version of Adobe's suite. And if you have Creative Cloud, it's all packaged in. So, do you have a question?
Are those all compatible with one another, like the equivalent of a PDF, or do you have to worry about proprietary software being only readable or usable on different platforms?
Great question.
The actual project files themselves will be specific to the software itself, but beyond that, everything is universal, including plugins and things which I'm going to get to later. But I think to a degree, the audio itself is universal. It's a universal format, a WAV or MP3 or whatever. So if you wanted to go from one to another, I have a lot of clients that record in one thing, they send it over to me, and I edit in a completely different environment. So that's not really a concern.
So don't worry about making the wrong decision.
PDF of the world, of the podcast world, is WAV.
The WAV MP3 when it's delivered.
MP3.
Yeah, would be the answer. Ideally, you record in WAV because it has a higher potential for quality. But by the time you're pushing it out to the people, you want it to be small. You want it to be easily downloaded. So we go for MP3.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure if you covered, but how are you keeping up with your content and avoid running into storage problems because fill up very quick?
Video, I can understand that because video is deep. I think it depends really where you're pushing it out to. We have huge backup storage that off-site backup storage that every 6 months I just download it.
But then we produce 30 or 40 shows a week, so
yeah,
it's probably not a problem like day one that you're going to have.
what I'd say is once you've got once something's out there, you can back it up and get rid of most of that. I guess it's a really good question. But then YouTube, it depends. Once you're uploaded, then that's somebody else's problem, I'd say, most of the time.
So I'd say, use third parties. So when you host a podcast, there's a number of different places you can host a podcast,
Right.
and that's where it then...
What you pay for with
yes.
podcast hosting tends to be data storage. They charge for the data storage, but...
And just so price-wise, Libsyn is kind of the heavyweight champion of podcast hosting, and we're going to get into that in a minute.
Yeah, we'll speak about Libsyn.
We'll get into that in a minute. But they have packages from as little as $5 a month.
Yeah.
And if you're doing, say, an hour show once a week,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of package would you need with Libsyn?
You would just, so what I tend to say is it's about 50 megabytes per hour of produced, released material and we can change that. We can encrypt it in different bit rates and that to change that. But as a general rule, so for Libsyn, that would be $20 a month, 15 or $20 a month.
So and that would really cover you with all of your storage you needed. One of the great things about podcasting and why it's so cheap is because, unlike video, it doesn't take a load of storage. It's you can create an awful lot before storage kind of becomes a problem, essentially. And also, once it's released onto all of the podcast networks, you don't need it anymore. It's out there. iTunes is taking care of that problem for you, and they're investing quite a lot into storage, I hear.
Equally, depending on how you're already situated, if you've got a WordPress site, PowerPress, who are a sort of another Libsyn, PowerPress are synced up with WordPress, and that integrates really well, and you could just use your web storage to host your show. Equally, Squarespace, if you have a Squarespace site, they have a podcast plugin extension that goes alongside that, and you can use your Squarespace storage. I mean, Squarespace charge more money than anybody else for anything, so I wouldn't get your storage to Squarespace, but it really depends on what you have already. Yeah.
How's that?
Probably didn't answer the question.
Cleverly.
Brill. So, where to spend? Best practices on budgeting. As we mentioned, the live stream we did a few weeks back and the GLCast series that we're doing at the moment goes deep into different budgeting for different scenarios and different people. But today I just thought I'd say, as a general rule, if you're what to spend on, if you're not going to spend on very much at all. And that is, for me, plugins. If you are...
What's a plugin, Tony?
See, he's great. A plugin is a piece of software, usually a third-party piece of software that will sit alongside your door to do something specific sound-wise that you want for your show. So ones I use every day are denoise plugins. I mean, and denoise might sound like a very generic term, but it essentially, there's certain plugins where you can go deep. There can be a million knobs, or you can have a single knob plugin that as you turn it, you slowly hear the noise, the background noise decrease until a certain point where you've broken the sound in.
Plugins fix things. That's what you said.
There are a million plugins for a million different things, but here I just thought I'd take you through the base. This is the industry of plugins and what they do and what are the ones worth investing in. Waves are the big boys. They've been around forever. They bought up and created. They create plugins like if you're into audio at all, like a Neve desk is one of the most expensive recording desks you could ever get. They'll make a plugin
Lots of nodding heads there. Neve
desk. They'll make a plugin which emulates the sound of a Neve desk. So, I'm a guitarist, I'm going to record my new album on a Neve desk. Well, it doesn't actually sound like it, but it's as close as you're going to get without actually having a Neve desk.
And they have plugins which are like crackle fixes.
Yeah.
So if you have a crackle on your podcast, then you can
Or a click. Or
uncrackle it or decrackle it. Or if you have a AC unit in the background and it's making lots of noise, you can use that denoiser that Tony was talking about. There's absolutely loads, and you can go out and kind of buy the specific one that fixes a specific problem, or, because it's coming up at the end of the month, Black Friday,
exactly. So, quickly, Waves are very expensive compared to the competition, but that's because they do a really good job. If you're ever going to buy something from Waves, do it on Black Friday or a deal day, any sort of deal day, because that you'll get reduced from $6,000 down to $300. There are some serious savings. They are selling a piece of software that they're just copying and pasting. There's no overheads for them. They'll sell it for whatever they can. But
so what's the other end of the market if Waves is at the top?
So the other end of the market, I'd recommend Akusonos are my favorite plugins for no knowledge editors or producers.
I can use them.
They do a bundle of denoise plugins: denoise, deverb, Desplosive, which is this anti-peaking one, and a de-esser. So they're, of all the plugins that you'd need, they do a package that has 3 of them, and it's less than $100, $80 I think, for a perpetual license. That denoise will help you get rid of that background, some of that background noise. The deverb will help get rid of some of the bounce if you do have a bad environment or a bad room. And the de-esser gets rid of the horrible S's that everybody inevitably has when they speak.
So as you can tell, Tony can talk about this for an awful long time and has spent all of my money on plugins over the years. I'm constantly.
What I do best.
Oh, wait, Tony! It's a bundle, Jay. One thing I needed. But in the next couple of weeks on GeoCast, there's real deep dives where Tony breaks down tons of real in-depth information. So
I'm actually running through it with our editors as well, and it turns out they don't know what they're talking about sometimes. So they're on the show with me, asking me questions about which plugins they should be using, which is
it's been a helpful exercise.
yes, it has indeed.
Okay, so at this point we thought this can get quite technical, right? Is there any other questions that you guys have? We've blown your minds a little bit about plugins. Hang on.
Okay, so you've been basically saying just start.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So how important is it to have like an intro and an outro, or should you just start with what you've got and then go from there?
I think it is important to have an intro and an outro, but I think it's important to practice as well. You might record a few shows and then decide this is not what I want to do. So I wouldn't worry about the minutiae, the intro and the outro, the music or anything like that until you actually know what the show is.
Mm.
So when I say start recording, you might bin a lot the first 3, the first 5, but you'll have practiced and you'll know, like, this is what I want to do with the show, or this is not what I want to do. I actually want to try something different and go over here. So I think, yeah, I wouldn't hold up because you're waiting for music or intros or anything. That just get started, and you can always add them afterwards.
Yeah, when we're saying start recording, we're not necessarily saying launch your show. Right? We're not necessarily saying post that onto iTunes today. What we're saying is if you start recording, things like what intro do I need, what outro do I need, might become a little bit more obvious after you've recorded the content and be like, I really need to introduce this guest. Because when we started talking, we did a whole interview, but we never really got into who they are or what they are. So I'm going to take 5 minutes before the show starts and say, this is Tony, he was very good looking, and he spoke about plugins for 6.5 hours. There you are. Or not. I would say with an intro and an outro, branding. Throw some music at it. You want people to know that it's your show as soon as they hear it. We had a podcast many years ago, and I had the same intro that I'd use every time to get in. That became very difficult after a while because I was so bored of the thing after about 50 or 60 episodes. I was also very good at it. So when we say start recording, I think what we mean is I've seen so many people spend 6 months talking about their show. My show's going to be this, my show's going to be that, my show's going to be this, and they haven't actually started recording. By doing it, you get to flex your muscle, you get to kind of work out the equipment, not make a mistake. So if you then do get Gary Vee to come on your show on your second episode, you're not going to spend 20 minutes of time being like, oh, sorry, hang on, as you try and plug things in and out.
Yes.
How much content would you say you should have before you start looking at an intro and music?
So I would suggest that you're thinking of that once you're have a launch date. I personally think a deadline is a wonderful thing. When I know that I've drawn a line in the sand, I can't just keep doing something forever and trying to make it perfect. So if you have a deadline written in the sand somewhere that you're going to work to and say, I'm going to launch my show on this date, then you can get some time done. I'd also suggest to have a few in the bag. Poor Justice has to make sure that the episode is done every single week, and that's tough. That's tough
If
for
you're
all of
talking
us.
about current events, that's just how it is, I'm afraid.
That is
But
indeed.
if you're not, take the time.
Yeah, and most shows aren't necessarily about current events or sports or need to be that sort of quick to release. And if you're going to sit down with a client or if you're going to sit down and push out your own content, get a few in the bag so you're not living hand to mouth and you could have a holiday, for instance, or you could have that Thursday off and say, guys, I will come out and play pool because I don't have to stay in and do my podcast for tomorrow. Also, when you release a show, if you have 3 to 5 episodes that you drop day one, let's be honest, it annoys me no end when Suits is only released once a week. I'm like, come on, I want to watch them all right now, right?
The last thing you want to do is find a new podcast that you love, and then there's only one episode. You've got nothing more to listen to.
We live in a binge society. I want
Yeah.
to find something I love, and I want to spend 18 hours listening to absolutely all of it. Now, that's great if you've got 1,000 episodes of your show, but if you're just starting a show, then give the people what they want. There's going to be more chance of people subscribing to your show if they catch one episode that they liked, and then they get to listen to 3 or 4 more and be like, I love this, I'm going to subscribe because I can't wait for the next one to be released. So I would say, if you were to work on about a number of, say, 5 to 10, you're going to have enough chance to really flex your muscle and practice and get kind of good, work out any problems, but also at the same time, you're going to have a good amount of content moving forward that you're not necessarily going to have to worry about that every week.
I have a question.
Sure.
Did you start it out as a hobby, or did you immediately start out as a business where you started an LLC or something?
Excellent question.
I'd love it if we started as a business. It'd be so good.
No, we ran a show that was just a hobby.
Insure yourself, like if someone heard something that you said and they said it offended them or caused them angst, or they saw themselves in the story you might have told and they were offended, you know.
So we fixed some of those problems early on. When we first started the podcast, Tony was working for Microsoft. I told you he was a teller. And I was working with an IT security company. We actually started the podcast because we didn't get to see each other anymore. So we'd catch up once a week and we'd spend an hour talking to musicians. It was called How to Write a Tune. We ran that show for a year or two, 18 months.
About 18 months.
Before realising the fact that podcast production could be something that we could kind of push out. Now, during that time, we did come against some problems, some legal problems, such as we were working with musicians, and something I suddenly realised is musicians don't own their own music.
Most of the time.
Who knew? And apparently not them.
All know the rules
So-
around the distribution of their music.
Yeah, so we had a relatively famous guest on, and we sat down with them, we talked with them an hour, and it was an absolutely great show. And we said, listen, you got a new album out, can we use this track? And he was like, man, sure you can. You use that track all day. We're going to use it at the beginning, you can talk over it, use it at the end as well, promote it, go for it. And then Universal called me. Hi, Jay speaking. And I was like, look, I got this email. He said I can absolutely use this. And they went, oh, great. He doesn't own that track. So thankfully we got past that without any horrendous lawsuits, and I'm still allowed to post that show and see daylight. But we used that show. We haven't really found necessarily that we've had to incorporate ourselves or insure ourselves, but what we do for insurance is at the beginning of the show, before we do a recording, we would explain to people that this is on record. This is very much on record, and for some reason you put a mic on in front of people and you hit go, and then about 5 minutes later they say, listen, off the record. I'm like, it's literally being recorded. This is on the
We're
record.
live streaming.
We're live streaming it. We've got it on Facebook Live. I'm going to post this as a podcast. But so we would do a kind of setup at the beginning to say, don't say things that you don't want people to hear. This is being for the public. And but again, that came from us having problems. And when one artist started calling some of their fans fat for no reason at all, just was a musician and was drinking beers and got a little loose by the end of the podcast. And all of a sudden, after we released it, we're getting angry fans comment.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we can edit that out. We can take it down. But I think giving yourself a sheet at the beginning and making sure you've got a few housekeeping items to stop things like that in the future happen can ensure you.
And equally, if you want to be extra secure, make that into a release, make it into a form, you get them to sign part of the responsibility. It would be
We're releasing what you said, so your problem. Hi.
Is there an optimal length for a podcast?
I love this question because I hear it just so often. So we once worked with a fitness podcast. Fitness podcast did like 3 to 5 minutes a day, every single day. When they first launched their show, we were like, you're crazy.
Yep.
This isn't something you're going to be able to sustain. They did. And they saw huge growth. And he was doing little workouts of the day or motivational speeches and such, but just little short pieces of content. On the other hand, I'm a big podcast fan. I like great, real long episodes. I really enjoy it when it's 1 or 2 hours because no guest can keep up a pretense for 2 hours. After about an hour, you kind of...
That's the real guy.
and then you become yourself a bit more, right? What I would say is who are you targeting? Who is your audience that you want this to sit in front of? Because if it's a business podcast and you know that you're targeting people on their commute, then think about how long the commute is, half an hour, 45 minutes. For some reason, people tend, but before they start listening to podcasts a lot, they tend to not think of it like a book. You know, I read books. I don't like sit down and be like, okay, here we go, I'm going to read the whole damn thing, you know. I sit, I read a bit, I put a bookmark in, and I come back. Same thing with the podcast. You press pause, and you can come back to it. A lot of people have a lot of success with about half an hour.
Yeah, I think it's weird to sit on the fence. It's somewhere between half hour, 45-minute shows or an hour show, and then 3-hour shows. These are different demographics almost. Where like Jay says, I really like a long show. If all shows were 3 hours, I'd be way happier. But not everyone feels that way at all. So I hate to sit on the fence, but it is.
I guess what I'd say is that more important than length of the show is consistency. It's the same across all marketing, but I want to know that show is there on a Tuesday. If you're releasing every Tuesday, I wake up on a Tuesday as a fan of your show, it better be there. So don't go from hero to zero, start doing 3-hour podcasts every week, I love it, and then suddenly realize like, I don't have time to do a 3-hour podcast every week, so I can't do this anymore. Thank you.
So tagging off that question, for every, I guess, amount of time that I record, how much time should I set aside for, say, editing that?
Great question.
Very good question.
If you're editing it yourself, I would say safe bet is to double the amount you've recorded. And it will vary. I do varying levels of edit for different clients, different people, depending on what they want. Our show, I didn't edit at all. I put the bumpers on and I push it out the door. Whereas some clients, I'll edit out every every little scuffle, every background noise, because it's a business show. It's what they want to present. So in doing that, it's probably 2 hours per hour of recorded air. But you could also, if you're not too bothered, you could push the thing out in minutes.
And be prepared to fall in love with it. A lot of people really fall down the rabbit hole on editing and will be spending far too much time on it.
Yeah.
Again, what I would say is it's about consistency. Don't set yourself some ridiculous target of editing out every and ah if you've just started and that's going to take you 7 hours to release a half-hour show.
And if you're not going to do it every time, what's the point?
No, unless you have 7 hours to spare, in which case go for it. It's great fun. I've never done it, but here it's great fun, and I've seen the guys really enjoy it. So what I would say is set yourself a reasonable amount of time. Realistically, if you're going to record an hour with someone, we've all had hour meetings. It doesn't take, 60 minutes. There's like 20 minutes to say hi and do you want a coffee? And like, oh, sit here, here's the microphone. Oh, yeah, sure, you need water. And then there's 20 minutes at the end when you've just spoke for an hour and you're the best of friends. So if that's nearly 2 hours of your time, then don't start spending another 4 or 5 hours if you don't have 7 hours to spare every month. Okay, cool. So we've only got a couple minutes left. So
we're running out of time.
Yes. Hi.
Okay, sorry, this should be quick.
Okay.
What is the music or bumper source equivalent of like stock photos?
Good question.
Licensing. It's very, very similar to stock photos in some ways. There are huge libraries and pools of free licensed music out there that you can find. Sometimes you have to attribute the writer, sometimes you don't. It depends on the actual specific license. Then you have some sort of Shutterstock, for instance, for stock photos. They also have a music library, which is very cheap, good for the price, $30 tracks, elevator music, but they are good for the price. And then it kind of scales up. There's a company I really like is audionetwork.com. You're probably in the close to $100 area, and they do different licenses. Podcasting falls under the kind of prosumer license. You're not. It's all quite well laid out. But Audio Network, they provide. They don't just buy terrible tunes. They actually provide. They help artists record the specific tunes for. They'll find a hole in their library and be like, we want this tune, so they'll go and find an artist and they'll pay for their studio time.
Which is why those tracks cost a little more. But they're
better.
Worth it. You especially after the amount of shows we've done, we're like Shutterstock.
It's also a who you know industry.
I heard that song on the video once.
Yeah.
But it's those same video, the same sort of music that you hear on marketing videos and those kind of things. That's the same place they're getting them from. But again, think of the scale, because you can absolutely do it later. You can pick a track, or do you know a musician who owns the music? Universal.
Or somebody that works for a label.
Yes.
It's a very big hat who you know in that area, because someone that's got the right job at a label can just send you an email saying you're allowed to use this track and you're away. That's it. But yeah, that's a case by case, right?
But don't use other people's music. For
Without
some
checking.
reason, podcasters are the only people on the planet who are like, I can
steal stuff, it's fine, right?
use 50 Cent's track, right? And I'm like, do you know 50? You just use his track? Okay, go for it.
One other question.
Sure.
When you edit, say for, well, Justice is professional, but say you edit for somebody else, do they expect you to edit to make them actually, when you edit someone's writing, you actually make them sound smarter, more coherent, clear, it makes more sense. That's real editing.
Yes.
When you edit, how do you contract or offer your services in a way that says A will remove the hisses, to Z will make you sound smarter?
It comes down to if you're working with an outsourced podcast producer like ourselves, in the initial conversation when you're setting up your show, that's something that will come out. We have worked with a podcast, in fact I was talking about yesterday, where a guy managed to end up on 3 different shows that we worked on and had a long before he started every sentence. Tony had a full head of hair before that. So in one podcast, which was like 45 minutes long, I think it was 87 edits he did to remove that. By the end of it, Steve was succinct, sexy speaker Steve.
Yeah.
But it's how.
But it doesn't work for everybody.
It doesn't work.
Vernacular is important. Some people you can cut depends how they speak. Some people you can cut the ums and it sounds smooth. Yeah. Other people it's fully part of the vernacular and you should leave it in because it is part of how they speak. And you kind of have to play that by ear.
Make pricing and contracting difficult.
Yes, it's very true. No, we tend to work it on a case of the time spent on the show that's released. So if we spend forever editing, then we don't necessarily have a lot of time to do audio production and make it sound fantastic. Okay. And it's kind of one or the other. Okay. A great example is a recent interview with Elon Musk, where he thinks a lot in conversations. If we'd edited that, I would have cut out those big gaps after every question because I was listening to it being like, is he going to answer?
Yeah. On the video, it's okay because you can see him thinking, but when you're listening, you're just like, is it stopped? What's going on?
So again, it comes down to your audience and stuff. So, guys,
I think we've got to wrap that up, yeah.
But thank you very, very much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
And please come and see us if you want Tony to tell you about plugins for another 20 minutes.
At least 20 minutes.
At least 20 minutes.